Welcome to Collective Behavior and Social Movements. This is Dr. Moore. Social movements are organized activities that encourage or discourage social change. They're a part of any society and operate in many ways, from underground groups to protests. Today, technology is increasingly a part of social movements in the U.S. and around the globe. The Internet is now imperative in building support for social movements. This is exemplified by the Zapatista movement, which has used the Internet since 1994 to challenge the increasing acceptance of capitalism and materialism and to win back land rights for indigenous communities in Mexico. The Occupy movement is also a recent example of a movement that has used the Internet to coordinate actions for a more equitable and just world. Indeed, movements are affected by globalization. They may be based in one nation, but by using technology and the Internet, they gain supporters around the world. Social movements use the collective agency of individuals to affect the social structure of society. Because of technological advances, it is much easier for all of us to participate in a movement that we feel strongly about. Even though we have busy lives, often juggling work, college, and family, we can always sign petitions which may affect some social change. Collective behavior describes a wide range of behavior in which groups and individuals come together for some purpose. Social movements are a particular form of collective behavior and are often responsible for changes in society. Sociologists have proposed many theories to explain why social movements emerge, to understand exactly how social change occurs or not in society. Though collective behavior can have both positive and negative results, the defining feature of collective behavior is that it is action by a group of people. A contemporary example of collective behavior is a flash mob. In a flash mob, a group of people assemble, perform what seems to be a senseless act, and then disperses. For example, in June of 2012, 4,000 people participated in a water gun battle in New York City. After the battle was finished, everyone in the group continued on with their day. Flash mobs have formed all around the world. A lightsaber flash mob was formed at a shopping center in Bristol, England in 2010. And in Mexico City in 2009, almost 14,000 people formed to dance together to Michael Jackson's Thriller. While such collective behavior was originally explained in psychological terms and was seen to be rather irrational, we now know that while collective behavior may sometimes be irrational, it is often rational and organized with a goal in mind, even if that goal is spontaneity and fun. Here's a brief overview of what we'll be covering in this presentation. Probably, though, the most challenging aspect of this chapter is facing up to the many types of behavior that are included. Collective behavior is a pretty big concept, ranging from crowds to mobs and fads. Therefore, it's useful to emphasize at the outset and clarify collective behavior by dividing this concept into two subcategories: localized collectivities and dispersed or mass collectivities. Localized collectivities is a concept that refers to people who more or less inhabit the same physical space, including crowds, mobs, which are highly emotional crowds that pursue a specific goal, and riots, which are highly emotional crowds that express undirected violence. Dispersed collectivities, on the other hand, also called mass collectivities or mass behavior, refer to people who are spread over a large geographic area. Dispersed collectivities include rumor and gossip, which is rumor about people, public opinion, which refers to attitudes about controversial issues spread throughout a population, and propaganda, which is information presented with the intention of shaping public opinion. Also included under dispersed collectivities are fashions and fads and disasters. We'll continue with a survey of social movements by taking a look at 4 types of social movements. We'll look at claims making, which is the movement's effort to win support and affect change. We'll take a look at just a couple of theories of social movements. Gender and social movements is another topic, which highlights how factors such as gender shape movements. And we'll wrap things up by taking a look at the stages in social movements, and we'll conclude with a look ahead. Sociologists have had a rather difficult time studying collective behavior for 3 reasons. First of all, collective behavior is diverse. It's also hard to explain, and much collective behavior is transitory. It doesn't last for a real long time. All collective behavior, though, involves the actions of something called a collectivity, a large number of people whose minimal interaction occurs in the absence of well-defined and conventional norms. It's important to emphasize here that collectivities differ from social groups. Collective behavior is not merely identical with the study of groups. Organizational behavior, for example, is the behavior of groups that are governed by established rules or procedures, which have the force of tradition behind them. Collectivities, or the groups within which collective behavior takes place, are not guided in a straightforward fashion by the culture of the society. At this point, I think it's important to emphasize the 3 traits that define collectivities: limited interaction, unclear social boundaries, and weak and sometimes unconventional norms. In fact, sociologist Peter Dahlgren characterizes collective behavior as the breakdown of the smooth rationality upon which the social order rests. I mentioned at the beginning that collective behavior is a big tent concept. It's a rather broad idea, and I thought it would be helpful to clarify collective behavior by dividing this concept into 2 subcategories: localized collectivities and dispersed or mass collectivities. Let's take a look at the major type of localized collectivities: crowds. Crowds are temporary gatherings of people who share a common focus of attention and whose members influence one another. Herbert Blummer identified 4 categories of crowds, and our text adds a 5th. And what differentiates these types of crowds is their social dynamics. A casual crowd is a loose collection of people who really interact little, if at all. A conventional crowd results from some deliberate planning, such as at an auction or a college lecture. An expressive crowd forms around an event with a lot of emotionality, and this can occur, for example, at a religious revival or at a Beyonce concert, for example. An acting crowd is a collectivity motivated by an intense, single-minded purpose. And an example of that is an audience rushing the doors of a concert hall. And sometimes because of the powerful emotions, things can get out of hand and even trigger violence. The final type is a protest crowd. And we note the difference here because this crowd is not simply motivated by emotions. The participants in protest crowds may stage marches, boycotts, sit-ins, and strikes. There's a purpose. This energy comes not only from the emotions, but through some type of change that they hope to see occur in society. Remember, an acting crowd is motivated by an intense, single-minded purpose. And acting crowds are set in motion by very powerful emotions. When an acting crowd turns violent, the result may be a mob, a highly emotional crowd that pursues a violent or destructive goal. Lynch mobs are the best known example. A riot is a social eruption that is highly emotional, violent, and undirected. In 1967, Detroit erupted in one of the deadliest riots in the history of the United States. It was reportedly started by a police raid on an unlicensed bar. It lasted for 4 days and nights. It was also known as the 12th Street Riot. Many were left dead, hundreds were injured, thousands were arrested. The reasons behind the riot went far beyond the unlicensed bar. There was a lot of racial tension in the city at the time. The city was in flames, and thousands of National Guard troops were called in. And then President Lyndon Johnson ordered paratroopers onto the streets. Retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel and novelist Ralph Peters said, quote, "Mobs alarm us, not only because they threaten violence, but because these humans temporarily have escaped the hierarchies essential to our confidence." Unquote. As you've probably guessed, sociologists have come up with several ways to explain crowd behavior. One is the contagion theory, which argues that crowds exert a hypnotic influence on their members, turning them into irrational automatons. Now, this theory is not entirely incorrect, but research does suggest that it overemphasizes the irrationality of crowd behavior. Convergence theory views crowds as assemblies of like-minded people who are drawn together because of their common attitudes and interests. This theory is reasonable, but it does ignore the ability of the crowd to intensify feelings and sentiments. Emergent norm theory suggests that distinctive patterns of behavior develop within the crowd as it interacts. This theory stresses the rationality of crowd behavior, and it does accommodate the fact that not all crowd participants behave in the same way. However, it does stress that norms do emerge within each particular crowd. Let's move on to the next category of collective behavior, which is mass behavior. Mass behavior refers to collective behavior among people dispersed over a wide geographic area. And one element of mass behavior is rumor and gossip. Rumor is unsubstantiated information spread informally, often by word of mouth. Gossip is simply rumor about people's personal affairs. Now, rumors have three characteristics. First, they thrive in a climate of ambiguity and uncertainty. Two, rumor is unstable. I think you'll remember the classroom activity where everyone lined up and something was whispered into the first person's ear, and he or she whispered it into the next, and so on. And how distorted that information became by the time it reached the end of the line. The third characteristic is rumor is difficult to stop. Another thing about the rumor mill is it seems the more absurd it is, the better. Beyonce and Barack Obama were actually rumored to be having an affair. She was chosen to sing America the Beautiful at his second inauguration, and a French newspaper got some attention by suggesting this, and it spread like wildfire. Two other aspects of dispersed collectivities are public opinion and propaganda. Public opinion refers to widespread attitudes about controversial issues. And what is interesting about public opinion is the beliefs of certain categories of people are valued less than others. And propaganda refers to information presented with the intention of shaping public opinion. All governments use propaganda for a wide range of goals. In the 1930s, the U.S. government created something of a moral panic in order to enact the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, which effectively criminalized marijuana. And some help from Hollywood came in the form of the film Reefer Madness. Well-known sociologist Margaret Mead said, "Do not make the mistake of thinking that a concerned group of people cannot change the world. It's the only thing that ever has." As we move ahead to talk about social movements, we do tend to think of these movements that have changed society as a whole. These include the abolition movement to end slavery, the women's suffrage movement to win women the right to vote, the civil rights movement to end racial segregation and discrimination, the women's liberation movement of the 1960s and 70s, and more recently, the marriage equality movement to gain gays and lesbians the right to marry. These movements have been very successful on many levels. Social movements are a part of any society. They occur in a variety of ways, from underground operations like Harriet Tubman's Underground Railroad, which helped Southern slaves escape to the North, to the present-day realms of cyberspace. The 1960s was a particularly important time because it brought to the world's attention the importance of activism in the streets. During the 1960s, students from colleges and universities protested the Vietnam War, racial discrimination, and unfair, discriminatory, and violent treatment of women. Society has shifted. Most students now have to work and attend college. Activism occurs on social media sites or through internet petitions, which sometimes start with just one person. In 2011, a 22-year-old student, Molly Catchpole, started a petition on change.org to fight Bank of America's $5 monthly debit card fee, and it was successful. Social movements have been characterized in terms of the breadth and depth of the change they are seeking. Combining these variables results in 4 types of social movements, and this depends on who is changed and how much change occurs. 1. Alternative social movements pursue limited change in certain individuals. 2. Redemptive social movements promote radical change in certain individuals. 3. Reformative social movements seek moderate changes in the whole society. And 4. Revolutionary social movements promote sweeping transformation of an entire society. There's a fascinating video in this unit on movements for and against nuclear energy and the sentiments about this energy source now that we are 30 years after 3 Mile Island. Public opinion has interestingly changed. In order for a social movement to reach its goals, it has to get the public's attention. And sometimes a change in public thinking has to occur. Claims making is the process of trying to convince the public and public officials of the importance of joining a social movement to address a particular issue. Some issue has to be defined as a problem that demands public attention. Claims making can occur through various means, such as books, documentaries, and media appearances by charismatic people. Social movements promote and discourage social change. And there are several theories to provide some explanation as to how they form and operate. There are numerous theories covered in the text, so please take some time to carefully review them. I'll just cover a few of them briefly here. Deprivation theory holds that social movements arise among people who feel deprived compared to others. Now, since most people experience some deprivation most of the time, this approach does not adequately explain why movements only arise some of the time. It also has a tendency to focus more attention on the setting in which a movement emerges than on the movement itself. Mass society theory traces the origin of social movements to rootless individuals seeking a sense of membership and purpose. The concept of a mass society is difficult to operationalize. In addition, this approach minimizes the legitimate political discontent which underlies many movements. And empirical research sometimes supports and sometimes challenges mass society theory. Resource mobilization theory focuses on the resources available to a movement. Now, this approach ignores the fact that even without extensive resources, groups of poor people who are committed and well organized can sponsor effective social movements. Structural strain theory argues that there are 6 factors that promote the development of a social movement. Now, this theory recognizes the complexity of the factors underlying movement development and is distinctly social in focus, but it is still incomplete. And finally, cultural theory developed from the recognition by sociologists that social movements depend on cultural symbols. Now, this approach reminds us that not just material resources, but also cultural symbols form the foundation of social movements. The importance of coming forward with personal testimonies within the movement to end sexual violence, for example, illustrates culture theory. For the women's movement, the key phrases glass ceiling or date rape really can focus a movement. More men than women tend to lead social movements. Although some social movements that challenge the status quo have been dominated by men, not all of them have. The abolition, suffrage, child care, and anti-drunk driving movements are just a few examples of the movements dominated by women. Now, researchers have identified 4 stages that social movements go through. Stage 1 is emergence. Social movements are driven by the perception that something isn't right. After emerging, a social movement has to define itself and develop a strategy for going public. This is stage 2, coalescence. To become a political force, a social movement has to become an established bureaucratic organization. And eventually, in stage 4, most social movements begin to decline. And this can occur for 4 reasons. First, the movement may have been successful, and because of this success, they dissolve. Second, a social movement may fold because of poor organization. There may be poor leadership, or a loss of interest, or insufficient funds. Third, a social movement may be co-opted. The leaders may be attracted by other organizations. And fourth and finally, it may be repressed. It may be crushed by government officials, especially if it's revolutionary. In conclusion, as we take a look ahead, while social movements have historically brought about change, new issues will ensure that social movements will continue to shape our way of life. The scope of social change is likely to increase for 3 reasons. First, historically excluded categories of people are gaining a greater political voice. 2, the technology of the information revolution has drawn the world closer together and made us more aware of social injustices. And third, social movements are now uniting people throughout the entire world.